If it's the first time that you're joining us, and thank you for joining us today. Today, and we know it's Women's Month. We're coming to the close of Women's Month. I know a lot of the speakers that I'll introduce to you have been really busy this month with various initiatives, dialogues, and the like. So we really thank them for their time today. Today, we'll be exploring how companies can build and promote gender equity in their organizations. Now, the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report 2024 estimates that it will take 134 years to achieve full gender parity based on the current rates of transformation in 146 countries. Now, that's quite sobering to hear that we may not achieve gender parity globally in our lifetime if it remains business as usual. So we thank everyone for joining us today for what is a really important discussion for us to learn from some of the good work that's being done out there and really have robust conversations that will take our work forward across corporate South Africa, government, and in NPOs in the development sector as well. So while we've made strides in certain social and political and economic spheres in South Africa, a number of the key indicators highlight the significant barriers to employment and career growth opportunities for women that still persists. And with this in mind, I'm looking forward to today's discussion as we unpack how companies can use their influence, reach, and resources to close the gender gap in their organization. Once again, thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights and time with us. And thanks to you, our audience, for joining us this morning. Our monthly webinars are 90 minutes. If you're joining us for the first time, this gives us more time to delve into the really important topics we deal with each month. And as you know, if you've joined us before, those 90 minutes go by really quickly. So let's jump into it straight away. A few technical points. Our platform allows you to follow the discussion, connect with your fellow delegates, pose questions, vote in our polls, which will come up, and then also to rate the session. And that's really important for us, that feedback, because we do try and tailor this so that it'll be valuable and useful to you, both in terms of the topics that we cover and the discussions and panelists that we have. So I encourage you to use the chat box to connect with your fellow delegates and share your thoughts on the content. You can also let us know where you're from. It's really good to see who is in the virtual room. And then if you want to ask a question on the same chat box, you just click on the green Ask a Question bar before typing your question. I will also be drawing from the Q&A box for our panelists to respond to in the discussion section of the webinar. So please do give us your questions, share your questions if there's any burning questions you may have, and then please direct the question to one or more of the panelists and keep it as brief as possible. There will be a short survey at the end of the session. I'll pop it into the chat box. Please do share your thoughts. As I'd mentioned, we really want to hear your feedback. In fact, we moved to 90 minutes as a result of the feedback we got from our users joined us. So please do share your thoughts there. And then just finally, this session is being recorded, and an article and a recording will be made available to everyone who registered next week. So please do share it with your networks, share it with your colleagues as well once that is out. And if there's anything that you want to revisit in the conversation. Just quickly on the agenda. So after my introduction, I will introduce our panelists for today, who will open with a 5-minute opening commentary, which will then frame the conversation from their perspective. And then we'll dive into the discussion, and our panelists will answer questions from the Q&A box, which I'll draw from there. So thank you very much. And then we'll have each panelist giving us a short closing comment to wrap it up and for something for you to leave with today. So I'm going to ask my colleague Sipe to launch the first poll. You will see it appearing on your screen now. We'd like to know which organization you represent, and then this will help the panelists and I shape the discussion to make it as effective and as tailored for you. So I'll leave that up for a minute. If you're joining us, if you've just joined us and you've missed a bit of the introduction, thank you very much for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Today, we're discussing how companies can build gender equity, support gender equity in their organizations and in their, the sphere of influence that they have, and looking after. Charity beginning at home, so to speak. So thank you for that. I've got the panel up. Great to see some new faces in the room, some new names, some old names as well. Thank you for joining our network on that regard there. You can also see the poll there. So thanks. As I said, I'm pleased to see some familiar names on the call, but also some new ones. Welcome to our CSI nonprofit network. A special welcome to our first timers. I'd just like to take a quick moment to tell you about Trialogue. We're one of a few consultancies that focuses exclusively on responsible business. We do this through our consulting services as well as through our knowledge sharing platforms, all of which aim to make corporate social investment in South Africa more effective. The two main types of consulting that we do are CSI strategy development and monitoring and evaluation. And we're currently hard at work at analyzing research and insights to our 2025 Trialogue Business and Society Handbook. It really is a really valuable publication that we put out every year. And for those of you on the call who've contributed to the research this year, we really do thank you for your time. If you'd like to advertise in the handbook or share a case study, which will be published online and shared in our newsletters as well as in the handbook as well, you can get in touch with Lerato Ramoba. I'll pop her email address into the chat box, and you can discuss some options with her. And then, you may know our Business and Society Handbook, which I just mentioned, our conference, which we held in May. But I'd now just like to take a quick minute to share about our Trialogue Knowledge Hub, which is really where, we've got a knowledge sharing platform open to both NPOs and companies to make their CSI and development work more effective. We share thought leadership, we share research on there as well as all the topics that we cover in the handbook, in the conference, and also bespoke for the Knowledge Hub there. I'd like to introduce you to the Trialogue Knowledge Hub, the leading information resource for social investors in Africa. The Knowledge Hub builds on Trialogue's deep knowledge and research-based strategy, which underpins the more established Business and Society Handbook and Conference. It's a unique repository of specialist information available for free to companies, non-profit organizations, governments, and scholars of African corporate social investment and responsible business. Since its launch in 2017, it has grown its coverage on a range of responsible business topics, including collaboration and shared value, showcasing the latest research, case studies, and insights. The Knowledge Hub offers a number of features, including articles, case studies, and expert opinions offering valuable and in-depth information, development sector sections that demonstrate how and why to invest with case studies and examples backed up by research, an industry leaders tab profiling companies and showcasing their CSI and responsible business objectives and initiatives, along with their news, insights, and case studies. A section featuring resources, guidance, and tips specifically for non-profit organizations. An NPO directory, which features an accessible and easy-to-use list of South African NPOs. A function to search by development sector or responsible business topic, together with a search tool making it simpler to find what you need. Visit the Knowledge Hub today and become a stronger social impact leader. Thank you very much. And just a reminder that the write-up and the recording of this webinar will be uploaded to the Trialogue Knowledge Hub as well. And I just want to say thank you to the Vodacom Foundation, who we are presenting today's webinar in partnership with. The Vodacom Foundation is also one of the industry leaders on the Knowledge Hub and supports the ICT for gender empowerment topic on the Knowledge Hub. So thank you very much to the team at Vodacom and the Vodacom Foundation there. So thank you very much. as we go through the topic, I just want to, put up our second poll now, which speaks to today's topic, as we get into the nitty-gritty. What do you believe is the biggest barrier to gender equity in South Africa's workplaces today? I'll leave that up for a minute as to give you some time to vote. Okay, great to see those coming through. Um, I will, yeah, let's see, let's update, just get that. Okay, there we go. Okay, so how are you voting? We're seeing what are some of the results coming through. We'll leave that up. Okay, thank you. Here are some of the results coming through. Unconscious bias in hiring and promotion decisions, um, pay inequality and compensation gaps, male-dominated organizational cultures, patriarchal societal norms with more women in caring roles. Thank you for those votes coming through. It really does give us a perspective on the conversation today and how you experience it. Lack of flexible work arrangements and family support, limited access to leadership development opportunities, which I think we'll hear about today and hopefully address, that limitation and obstacle as well. But most of you saying unconscious bias in hiring and promotion decisions and patriarchal societal norms with more women in caring roles. And I think some of the data speaks to that and how, our business ecosystem is located in our social structures. And something that we need to address. So we can see, I mean, just these are some of the graphs, Stats SA releasing their quarterly labor statistics and showing that women bear greater burden of unemployment, with 35.9% of women unemployed compared to 31% of men. So that 35.9% higher than the average, and it really is concerning. And then for those women in employment, less than 7% hold managerial positions, while many are concentrated in lower skilled and semi-skilled roles. So it really does speak to the skewing of the nature of roles in our organizations. If we now look at the gender equality, if we look at the global perspective here, that World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Report, showing that the global picture mirrors what we see in South Africa. And South Africa was part of this research as well. You can see that first graph at the top there showing you, just how the levels of women in the various roles in our organizations decline as you move higher up in the organizational structure as well. And then the second one then, very, very applicable to the work that Vodacom is doing to address this, is the percentage of women employed in STEM versus the general employment participation, so hovering around the mid to high 20%. That's if you're looking at STEM, and we know that technology and science is only going to grow in this digital world that we live in, find ourselves living in today. Now let's put up the third poll. How would you rate your organization's current workplace gender equity? And I think this is important for us to see, hear from you what the state of your organizations are. I'll leave that up for a minute. Thanks. As those votes come in, it's great to see. If you've joined us, thank you for joining us today. We really look forward to having you and to having you share this important discussion with us. So let's see what some of the votes are saying. So making good progress. We have clear strategies and targets, but not yet an equitable workplace. That's it's a good indicator right? Good indicator, 25% of you saying there, 50% saying getting started. We're developing our approach. That's great. And we hope that this conversation and the work and research that's out there will help you, to develop that approach. Behind the curve, we need to do much, much more. 25% saying there. More votes coming in. Thank you very much. Behind the curve. Getting started, that's great. And again, that's what we're aiming to do, is to add to the body of research, to add to the body of best practice by having conversations and pulling on the experts and people who work, who've seen some progress and maybe have learned from mistakes in the past. But that's important for us to have there. So thank you very much for your votes. I think it's time for us to get into the real meat of the discussion today. And I'd now like to introduce our panelists for the day. We've got Mikateko Nkuna Valoy. She's the Managing Executive for Talent and Culture at Vodacom South Africa. Thank you and very welcome. And thank you for Vodacom's support. We've got Shamila Subramania, a name and person many of you will know. She's the Chief Executive Officer of the National Business Initiative, who really look to come together and amplify the work that business is doing. And then we've got Vatiswa Moya. She's the Executive Director of the South African Women in Dialogue, organization started by former First Lady Zanele Mbeki, and does a lot of work around advocacy, policy, influence as well. So I'm really pleased for all of you to join us today, and thank you very much for making your time and sharing your expertise. I know all of you have been really busy this month. Mikateko, let me start with you, and if you could just turn on your camera for your opening commentary. Tell us about Vodacom's strategy to build gender equity in the workplace. I know it's a central part of the CSI work that you do, but also the organizational philosophy.
100%. Good morning, Sheldon. Good morning, colleagues. Sheldon, let me know or give me a signal if you can hear me well, see me, and then I can just rock and roll.
Yeah, you're perfect. We can see you and hear you. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, fantastic. Firstly, thank you very much for having me on this platform. It's always a great pleasure to be able to speak about such important topics. And in my line of work, we always talk about the sweet spot being when your personal purpose aligns with that of the organization that you work for. So really awesome to be able to talk about transformation at large. And in today's conversation, really gender parity, which happens to be a personal passion of mine, but also very much in my capacity as talent and culture is the work that I do every day with my team. We have an amazing purpose. I'm sure if you've interacted with Vodacom, you know that everything that we do is driven by our purpose, or stems from that purpose. And the two pillars of our purpose talks about planet, which is how we impact the environment and sustainability and all of that. The other pillar being around people. And we specifically say we want to empower the communities within which we operate. And in that people, we also, obviously their bigger vision being connecting people for a better good or better future. And when we talk about connecting people, it could very well mean the network, which is our core business. But also we talk about connections that we build, and we talk about how we really connect people to better opportunities themselves. And so when we talk about topics such as gender parity, it's just beyond a tagline for us. Is what we live, is what we breathe. We do a number of things inside the organization. Maybe first to just call out some stats. 49% of our workforce is actually female across the board, across all levels. And the work that we reap the benefit of today was started by the likes of Shamil, the likes of Matimba. They were the real champions of transformation. Today we have our exco. You see, Videsha leads the Vodacom business. The likes of Njabulo, who heads up HR, Refilwe. We really have or are leading from the front in that perspective. But I think to just name a few specific initiatives, because obviously we have to keep the work alive and we have to keep championing, as you called out some stats. It's going to take some good 100+ years, before we reach the desired state. And so the work needs to continue. Today, we have a few things that we do. One of those very important targets is the 50-50 reach. We call it reach, which goes all the way to Vodafone. And we say we want by 2030, 50% of our executive teams to be females, and that's just across, and not just Vodacom South Africa, but just across the footprint. So that target's super important for us. It's integrated into our everyday life. We measure ourselves on it. It's an actual metrics that's tied to rewards and all these things. So we all are very much invested in that. And one other key thing as well is that when we talk about our targets, we understand that getting women into the workplace and in senior executive is one step closer. It's not the all, in that once women are in the workplace and in these positions. I was listening to you earlier call out some of the themes that are coming out from the poll: unconscious bias, carrying responsibilities and all of that. So we take the work few steps further and say, what happens when the women are here at work? What happens when executives have caring responsibilities? So we then start to shape the work around lived in experiences of women at work. And there we do the work of how do we set women up for success? What are the systematic things that we need to do, policies, structures, ways of working that we need to institute and champion in order to make sure that women can indeed succeed in the workplace? So that's what we do for that, from that perspective. And then we also understand that we have to grow the pipeline, so we know that Africa is a growing population. We know that most of our future skills will come from this continent. So what is the work every day that we are doing to champion this? At a very, very basic level, we go down to high school level and we have our program Code Like a Girl. Code Like a Girl is a program that we've been running for plus 10 years now. And we go to the deep sides of our country to look at, communities that are disadvantaged, where young kids won't necessarily have exposure to STEM careers and all of that. And we introduce these courses, or rather this world, to them as a way of unlocking and as a way of equalizing the opportunities from a very, very young age. So we give some introduction to the world of STEAM, hoping that some of these young kids will grow to want and be able to know where to, if they wanted to build a career from that perspective. We have also what we call our early careers program, much of those targeted to what can we do to really improve the accessibility for this type of world. We target females at a very young age in terms of how we distribute our investment from that perspective. Then we also have, young professionals or the youth at work, who are in the early parts of their careers. And we have different initiatives from that perspective. But one that I would like to call out is YouGrow. YouGrow is our partnership, or rather we have a partnership with YouGrow, which basically is a behavioral coaching platform that enables young women in the organization to kind of have personal coaching or coaching on the go. So if I'm young and I'm upcoming in the world of work and, I have all these many things to balance and my brand, and I'm trying to build and get into the next kind of career or next kind of big gig, if I can call it that, what I would be able to do is to tap into that platform. It's also a broad network of other women in other organizations that are kind of going through similar journeys. And what we're trying to do there is to say, we want to be able to enable these young females at a very, very young age in their careers to be able to know how to set themselves up for success, to provide this coaching mechanism. Maybe it's a quick read, maybe it's how do I balance my personal home life with work, and that sort of thing. So really, 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 some big investments behind all these initiatives from the early ages to early in the careers and much later in the work, or in organizations when people are already in these senior positions. We do have all these interventions that are targeted to champion and set up women for success. I could go on and on, about this topic, as you can see, right?
Yes,
But I
yes.
know I will park it here for now.
No, and I'm
And yeah,
sure I'm
thank
sure
you,
a lot of it
Sheldon.
will come out in the discussion. Thank you very much for that, Mikateko. It really does sound comprehensive, holistic, and well thought through. And I imagine, a program and philosophy and strategy that has iterated itself over, the life cycle of
100%.
Vodacom. Yeah. I popped into the chat just a link to a write-up on Code Like a Girl that
Yes,
Mika referred
yes.
to. So I've popped that into the chat for anyone who wants to read more about it. Thank you very much, Mika. Shamila, let me come to you. Looking, expanding our view a bit, obviously, the CEO of the NBI. From the NBI's perspective, how does the initiative work with companies, with government, to build more equitable organizations and ultimately ecosystems?
Thank you, Sheldon. And I'm wondering if Mika is going to be tracking applications at Vodacom, because I think after her speech, we're probably going to have a lot of people saying that that's where they want to go and work. And I'm just going to pause on that for a moment because, we can talk about fantastic strategies, but it's the lived experience of people in the organization that say a lot. And so I have to do a shout out for Vodacom. I remember a few years back, and Mika, I don't know if it's still a practice there, being at that stage a young mother myself, the real challenge of getting back into the workplace after having a baby as one of those particular issues that impact women. And I had a friend at Vodacom who said, no, 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 we actually get, a few months where we can just ease in. You don't have to go back into the full time.
Yeah,
And I was
yeah,
like, wow, I'm going to go look to
yeah.
work for Vodacom. But it was one of those things that really was testament to understanding
100%.
how you change the lived experience in the
Yep,
workplace.
spot
And
on.
so I had to do that shout out makeup because it really, when you were
Shamina.
speaking, I think said to me that that's an organization that has taken to heart what it means to actually work in that space rather than the nice sounding strategies and maybe even the good
Exactly.
ratings, right?
Yep, yep,
Which don't
yep,
reflect. And it's what your
yep.
people say about you that is the most important thing. And I think
Certainly.
that's
Thank you
great to
so
you.
much, Shamila.
No, it was,
Really,
I
really
have to say there was
appreciate
a
that.
personal actual experience, listening to Vodacom at a time when
Fantastic.
in my own life it was so relevant. So thank you. And thank you to everybody joining us today, Sheldon, for the invitation to present. Also, so to tell you a little bit about the NBI, we're really an organization that tries to look at the spaces where there's collaborative action for systemic change. And that sounds like a lot, but effectively says that many of the challenges that we face in relation to environmental issues, societal issues, are often too big for any one entity to tackle on its own. And so how do we start looking at those spaces that are cross-cutting, that fundamentally affect everybody, where we can bring that collective together in meaningful ways? And so one of the areas that we do focus on is under the broader banner of social transformation, and where particularly our work in gender sits. I won't reiterate the stats that you have already presented up front. I think those are well known. We understand what those challenges are, and the lack of representation of women as you go up the ladder, the fact that that gets less and less. The fact that some of the research is also telling us that even if you do make it there, once you're there, the barriers for you to stay in are actually quite significant. And Mika's touched on some of what they've noticed already within their own organizations to make sure that at that level, that women get there eventually, that they stay in there. Because what we want to call effectively a dropout rate is also quite significant. And these are things that should deeply concern us. So when we look at the NBI and what we do, we effectively really try to organize ourselves in a few ways. We convene, so it's creating the platforms where government, civil society, business can come together. and it's a safe space because it's not sort of a mandated space. How do you discuss those challenges? How do you share the learnings? And where can you find those places where you can commit to collective solutions? So they're not compliance driven. And I think there's a lot to say for having safer spaces where you can talk about real issues. And that is very important. So they're practical, and we can get leaders to grapple with the real barriers that they're seeing. The second thing we do is we try to equip. So, how do we provide the research tools and the frameworks that can help businesses to take action? A lot of that means that we ourselves will convene some of the research where we see those gaps exist. And of course, the identification of those gaps will come from those spaces where you can have those conversations and really tackle those on a very real level and an honest level. And then start to say, okay, how do we back that up with some of the research? And then at the same time, develop the tools that we can then filter back in and make a space where companies, for example, that might not have the means and the resources to do a lot of themselves, have a space they can go to and already access things that puts them ahead of the curve in being able to be more progressive. So you can go to the space and say, I don't need to create on my own. Here's so much of work that's been done. Can I do that? And then also from that, you yourself start to add into the pool of being able to just better inform even that collective. And so through that, you get more voices in, you have a better handle of the issues. And so that's how we look at equipping. We can do that, things like our gender pay gap calculator. It can enable companies to interrogate their pay structures and uncover hidden inequalities. It's a tool you can go in completely anonymously, put in your data along the different stratification that you have, and it will tell you where those inequalities land. Nobody needs to see it, but it's a place where you can go, take that out, use that internally, and be able to say, so very practically, it's in my face. I can see now exactly what I mean by a pay gap. That's one of the tools. We'll also produce thought leadership, like our gender equity in the workplace reports. So you can look at benchmarks and best practices, and particularly in South African companies, because we also know that there are certain contexts that are fairly unique. And so really having homegrown information on that is a very useful way. And then enabling systemic change. And like I said, recognizing that no single company can do this on its own. Where can we do that collectively? Is there a space where we can say, if we pull our funds, we can create something or a tool or a repository, for example, that benefits the collective? And so it is in the spirit of getting everybody up along that curve. And so whilst many companies, like I said, can do a lot on their own, that space where we can say, how do we benefit the collective? How do we get everybody to thrive and rise together are some of those ways in that we look at that. And so that has a sector-wide shift, opportunity, and that ripples outwards into communities and then into the economy. Because if we can do that, we can start to actually close some of those gaps and those barriers, and that's what we want as a society. Because if we have a society that is thriving, of course, we can have an economy that thrives. And that really gives an opportunity for all people, female or not, to be able to really contribute meaningfully into that. And so I want to just quickly touch on why it's critical. And there are three main cases that we tend to look at. The first one being the business case, the second, the societal case, and the third, the credibility case. The business case around that, I think, a lot has been written, but just to very quickly reiterate, greater gender diversity, companies with greater gender diversity consistently outperform those that don't, and that we know is there are facts and figures available. So advancing women into leadership improves decision making, sparks innovation, it strengthens financial performance. So what's there not to like if you're a business? It also leads to higher employee engagement and lower turnover. And I think this is really important. Mika might touch on that later on, being in that space, is that there's a huge cost to high turnover for companies. And that cost is really a multiplier effect. So if you can actually create an environment where you have higher employee engagement and lower turnover, it fundamentally affects the bottom line of the company. And because people who want to work for organizations, that who want to work for those that reflect the sort of fairness and opportunities, and then they can see themselves thriving within that. Societal case being the second one, when women thrive in the workplace, that impact definitely extends far beyond the office. Women reinvest in their families, in education, and in their communities. We know the numbers tell us again, I have a strong financial services background. Women are better savers and they're better payers. And they really try to employ that money in the way that benefits their families, usually first and foremost. And so the multiplier effect on society at large is actually quite massive. We take one of the gender pay gap, and you flighted those numbers earlier on, Sheldon, where you talked about on average a woman might earn 80% less than a man, and in some cases, that's far worse, right? What does that mean? So take a practical example. If a man earns R1 million a year and a woman 800,000 rand to reflect that 80% gap, what could you do with that extra 200,000 rand? Give that to a woman, and what is she likely to do with that? In terms of what we know already being the trends around investing in family, investing in society, and hence in societal growth and development. And then third, the credibility case. So business can't claim to be agents of change and social responsibility while they're failing to transform internally. And so we really start to talk about credibility. Organizations are inequitable internally. Their external programs really risk being seen as tokenistic rather than transformative. And so those are the different areas that we try to work across. We're navigating the unconscious biases that still shape hiring decisions, promotions, creating the awareness that those things exist. One of the practices that's been called out and is a growing movement globally is the practice of asking for a payslip. And often because of inherent biases and you're already on the back foot earning usually, less than men are, and you present that payslip and an organization's practice is to offer you 10% on what you earn, it just entrenches inherent inequality and gaps. Looking at those inequities, organizational cultures, those are the areas that we work across. And then, of course, looking at flexible work arrangements that allow for us to be able to take into account the particular challenges that women have. And usually the payback is that you will find people that work many times harder and actually are hugely more productive just to have that level of understanding and flexibility. And so the last part of that is just, I think, from the work that the NBI does, is a very strong focus on understanding intersectionality. So in South Africa, we need to acknowledge that gender doesn't exist in isolation. It intersects with race, with class, and with geography and age, of course. And so, if you look at that, a Black woman in a rural community will face compounded barriers that look very different from a white person in an urban setting. And so that's why we emphasize the intersectionality and approaches that really take that into consideration and looking at transformation, because true equity really does mean recognizing the full complexity and lived experiences. And of course, there are many, additional sort of barriers between that and even more granularity when you look at different backgrounds and circumstances that as a country we're surmounting. And so that for me are the key things we look at, because we understand that this is what needs to happen, that it's not easy to have the conversations within companies, but that there's a huge power in the collective, both for collaborative learning, but also to really push and shift that dial ahead quite significantly. Thanks, Sheldon.
Thank you so much, Sharmila. And I think I really love your point about the intersectionality, and it's one, in South Africa, which so complex. It's the same the world over, but as you mentioned, one we often forget is geography, especially sitting in big cities. The complexities and the obstacles for women in rural communities is even higher. Vatiswa, coming to you now, and looking at the work that the South African Women in Dialogue does, how does the organization use its influence, voice, and expertise to promote gender equity?
Thank you so much, Sheldon, and good morning to all the participants that joined this powerful webinar already. I think quite a mouthful by my fellow panelists. So gender equality is at the heart and obsession of the work that South African Women in Dialogue does and has been doing for 22 years now. So the organization, being a non-partisan organization, was essentially established to provide a platform for women of all demographics, regardless of age, religion, socioeconomic status, education status, to engage, advocate, and influence towards resolving of issues that affect their own development and empowerment. At the heart of this for us is the notion that nothing for us without us, which therefore means that we don't engage for the sake of engaging. To your question, we say, how do we also advocate for inclusion and strategic presence and representation at spaces where decisions are made and policies are formulated? Because when we do that, we are therefore enabling and accelerating provision of programs that will benefit women. And we also believe, I think, as Shamila has indicated, that if you empower a woman, you are also going to empower the community. So for the number of years that we have existed, our approach then in solving for gender equality has been anchored on providing dedicated focus on some of our key strategic pillars. And the first one being making sure that as SAWID, we build the institution itself. We build the organization by capacitating and growing our SAWIDians to effectively and impactfully participate in spaces that are afforded to us countrywide. And then the second part, which is at the heart of this conversation and this topic, is advocacy and partnerships, which for us is very, very important. I think Shamila took the words right out of my mouth, saying that we also recognize as SAWID that we do not have all the answers and may not be strong in everything. And as such, it is important for us to establish strategic partnerships and relationships that we will leverage off in the work that we do, whilst also proactively looking for advocacy opportunities, which will help us to influence and position our women agenda effectively. So as SAWID, we have a diverse industry sector expertise of our women, who we then place in advocacy roles so that they can provide and use their capabilities and expertise to spotlight on the key issues that require elevation and resolution. And then the third part, which is then at the heart of our name, South African Women in Dialogue, is that then the dialogue itself is that engagement tool that allows us to ensure that we are not representing ourselves. We are drawing in the voices and the experiences of the diverse women of South Africa from grassroots to urban. And as such, elevating those voices and experiences to then influence and spotlight on the real issues that affect them. We also do embark on capacitation programs that provide leadership opportunities and connectivity with work opportunities. One of the two programs that is at the heart of what we are doing right now is on Saturday, we will be graduating a group of 25 young girls whom we enrolled a year ago to expose them to self-leadership and development opportunities, almost as at the view that we have to start when they are young to expose them to what leadership is about, how they show up, how they do not show up, so that they can become better versions of themselves. And then the second one is the program that we're embarking on as SAWID, where we are drawing on unemployed social workers. South Africa has over 9,000 unemployed social workers in societies that require the expertise and the skills of these social workers. How then do we help facilitate networking, dialoguing opportunities for these social workers so that they can be connected with opportunities that will place them where they are needed the most? And then lastly, all the work that we do as SAWID has to be informed by research. In some of our partnerships, we also partner with academic institutions who back up the work that we do with research and information that will help us tap into the areas that we tap into with from an informed position. And also making sure that we've got a knowledge repository that helps ensure that this rich information that we gather over the years does not become obsolete, but can also be reusable over periods of time for sustained impact. So all of this for us, our approach is that this is an ecosystem of knitted interventions that we actively pursue in recognition of the fact that for an issue as complex as gender equality, there are many ways to skin the cat, but there must also be method in the most effective and sustainable ways to therefore skin the cat.
Sorry, you would think that in 2025, I would know how to switch my mic on before I speak. But I love that. I love that analogy.
Still
You
happens.
know, yeah, it still happens. But I love what you say, Vatiswa, in ensuring that it's research based. What I love about the array of expertise on the panel is, you know, there's an array of expertise across corporate South Africa, parastatals, consultant, you know, advisory as well. So, you know, you've really lived the experiences and would have experienced those in your you know various roles in both the corporate space and obviously you know in the SOE space as well. I'm going to ask Sipe to launch the fourth poll, and actually I'm going to ask my panelists as well to please put on their cameras and their mics so that as we come to you, it spotlights you immediately. So thank you very much for that. And the fourth poll is, how optimistic are you about achieving meaningful gender equity and equality and parity in South African workplaces by 2030? And now why I say 2030 is because that's the you know, if you've followed the UN's SDGs, and I think it's SDG 5 about equality in various different spaces, and also you know various different demographic markers as well. You know, 2030 is kind of you know, a red letter year in terms of progress, and you know where we say, look, what progress have we made as well. Hopefully you'll be more optimistic by the end of the conversation, hearing you know the good work and what can be done. But I think we should be, you know, have a look at how do we perceive it? You know, it's a long, hard slog, as you know, I think we all acknowledge. But how optimistic are we? Because I think that drives as well the view on how we will, you know, on the progress that will be made. And there has been progress made, but you know, the acknowledgement has to be there as well that it hasn't been quick enough, and the progress isn't just down to corporates, isn't just down to NPOs, but it's societal progress that needs to be made as well. And if you can't see, if you haven't been able to see the poll or the new poll, just refresh your feed, and you'll be able to see all four polls now. And if you've missed one, you can go back and vote. We'll keep track of those results as they come in. So let's see how those votes have been going. 13% very optimistic. Current momentum will get us there. 13% cautiously optimistic. Progress is happening, but slowly. 38% neutral. Depends on sustained commitment from leadership. I think that's important, that executive support and coming from the top. Somewhat pessimistic, 0%. Too many systemic barriers remain. And then 38% very pessimistic. The 2030 timeline as part of the UN's SDGs is unrealistic. Okay, that one's just fallen to 27%. More votes coming in. Thank you very much for that. As we can see, gives us a sense on, you know, what the optimism and the feeling is, or levels of optimism that we have in the room. So thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to you know, Shamila and Vatiswa. I want to draw on, you know, my point I just made based on your expertise in various different organizations, and then obviously the more broader role that you play now. Vatiswa, from your perspective, how has that helped inform the work that you do and how you approach, you know, work on gender equity?
Okay, got also muted there. Thank you. So I think for us, Sheldon, at the heart of the work that we do is the importance of collaboration and not superficial collaboration. One of the programs that I forgot to mention is us as SAWID embarking on ensuring there is a central view of who's who in the zoo. So when Shamila talks about how we are drawing on government, civil society, and corporate, that view is still a pain point in the system. And in the absence of that, you find that there's a lot of duplication of effort and there's a lot of wastage of resources because the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And the impact of that on the work around gender equality then is we then fail to make the strides that we would like to make because we are duplicating and not necessarily optimizing on the expertise that we have, and thus accelerating delivery of programs, delivery of solutions, and shifting policies that need to be shifted to enable gender equality. Muted, Sheldon.
There we go.
Yes, better. I can hear you now.
Button. Thank you very much, Batiswa. Sorry about that. Shamila, from your perspective as well, I mean, you've had a number of roles across different sectors and, a large NPO like the WWF, the JSE, banks as well. How has that helped you in the work that the NBI does, and especially in your social transformation stream?
Thank you. So, Sheldon, if you're talking about past experience, I think it's more the reflective, which is going to say, I've lived in those situations, I've worked in those corporates, worked in male-dominated sectors, understood what that meant. And then I think, you become a lot more attuned to the particular barriers that as a woman you face. That quite often, if you start, in my case, I started my career when I was 18 years old. You don't even have the language to explain what it is that you're referring to, except for later on, as you get more, I guess, accomplished and then also understand that and you get more exposed to work around gender. So that would be the first one as a lived experience. But I think I really need to acknowledge the fact that we've got a super strong, fantastic team at the NBI who spent years working with this and who's done the research, who are social scientists who have done and who themselves, in many instances, have worked in corporate, so are able to bring together both the sort of the research-based, the academic knowledge with the practical experience. So from my experience, I think if I had to go back to your question about reflecting on how that's been helpful, I think it's also understanding from the inside out. And because the NBI is a business organization, to be able to understand how corporates think, act, and behave is really useful. But also then, as a woman, to be able to reflect on the lived experience of when these things are not adequately considered, when you have things that you can't speak about, like silent gatekeeping, and you only are able to get the language later on, but you know what that feels like, and then being able to tease out that in some of the work we do when we're engaging with others, say, but I've acknowledged this, or I've noticed this. Could this be something that we need to unpack a little bit more? So I felt that's quite helpful in being able to drive that sort of work, but then also to be able to speak the languages of corporates and understand, even for people championing those sorts of issues within organizations, the barriers that they themselves face in being able to work through that and understand what that means. And having the language to call out negative practices when you see them. So those are some of the areas where personally, having that background, having spent 25 years in corporate has been hugely useful. And also within a sector that is known to be quite male dominated traditionally, which is financial services. And to see where things have worked and when those shifts have happened, what has worked, but also some of the quieter biases. I've also found that now from this side, working with the NBI, I'm able to have a lot more honest conversations with people in different sectors, in different organizations, who could be our members or maybe not even our members, but because you play a different role, My previous role, for example, might have been the JSE sometimes, and it's a wonderful organization. It's one of those, really leading organizations in terms of being led by women, for example. But you look at that and say people look at you like you're the regulator because you're also that, and so might not speak to you as honestly as they otherwise might have. So those have been some of the things that could come together with a lived experience, looking at the work we're doing at the NBI, and then also being able to reflect as somebody who's worked on the other side.
Shamila, you mentioned an important point there in terms of working in what we can all admit are male-dominated industries, finance. Mika, technology is one, which is the hub of Vodacom's, the base of its work. Obviously, you've got the various different programs as well. But in terms of how important it is to address that, be aware of it, especially in that space, whether it's be engineers, whether it be more scientific based. How does Vodacom go about that to ensure that you do build support, a great environment for women, career opportunities and progression in what could be a very male-dominated industry? Oh, I think you're on mute. Yeah, there we go.
It seems to be everyone's it seems to be everyone's thing today. Sheldon, yeah, I mean, as you've rightfully said, I think one of my points made earlier was around it's not enough to identify women, bring them into the workplace. There is more that we need to do to set up the environment. In fact, in order for the environment to be conducive, and hence I spoke about the lived-in experiences. So I think just to be, firming up on some of the points that Shamila already mentioned, in our world, we actually have a stream of work that we call culture in the organization, and that is broad, as you can imagine, and very big piece of work, but it's around how do we set up the organization to be inclusive. And so the typical stuff sits there, gender stuff, but we have also a lot more progressive work to do around, the youth representation, more progressive work to do around different communities such as your LGBTQI plus, etc. So the work in its broader sense is around inclusion. And so when we look at the environment, we know there are biases that comes with being a male dominated environment. And so we go out to kind of just see where can we unplug some of these things. The work on its own is not something we could do by ourselves at the center in terms of HR. We do believe in the importance of leadership setting the tone, which is why this work lives in all the way to board level in terms of measurable metrics. However, we do have what we call our employee resource groups. And one of the platforms, for instance, will be a Women's Network Forum. Another one will be a Youth Networks Forum, and so forth. And these networks are basically our employee representative forums that kind of serve as a feedback loop between ourselves, the employees, the executives in the organization, and we all work together to champion the workplace where we can all thrive. In fact, maybe one of the points to cement here is that we have what we call our EVP, and one pillar of our EVP speaks to belonging. And that belonging also speaks to, I need to be able to belong in the organization in order for me to thrive in the organization. So when we think about these EVPs, we have different proof points and work that we need to do for the different groups to be able to feel like I can belong, and to be able to feel like I'm set up for success so I can thrive. So leadership commitment, really, really key for us. We, in fact, when we set up our inclusion strategy, one of the first things we call out is leading from the front. And when we say leading from the front, we talk about leadership, we talk about allyship, we talk about sponsorship, we talk about whether it's education or championing Mika and all of these things. So we package that as we want our leaders to lead from the front. And then from an organizational level, that we have these employee resource groups that help us to understand what are the dynamics in the organization. They serve as a feedback loop to kind of mirror back to us what actually is happening. And we have a very, very comprehensive listening strategy at Vodacom. And we do our listening very regularly, and sometimes it's more structured in that we do pulses, spirit beats, etc., that surveys our culture from an employee perspective, and we use all those different insights to make different decisions every day. And one of those things we goal ourselves on is really the culture piece, the belonging, and how the different groups of people in the organization feel represented, feel supported, feel championed, feel set up for success. So I could go on, but structurally, we have all these different initiatives, and we don't do the work by ourselves. We have the leadership, we have the HR community, we have employees themselves on the ground. And I think Vatiso spoke as well very much about it's an ecosystem, and we need to be able to tap into the different parts of the world in which we exist if we are going to move any progress going forward. So obviously, the work particularly I would say if the culture is pretty much pronounced in to be male dominated, then the work there is a lot more work to do. But if I look at where we are, I think progress has been made. Massive progress, and hence I started the conversation by giving a shout out to the likes of Shamil, Matimba, and everybody that have come before us. When we did this piece of work around lived-in experiences, we actually were able to partner with our strategy division. We went inside the organization, partnered with strategy, partnered with Employee Network Forum to actually get our employees in our organization to tell us about their barriers, perceived, conscious, unconscious, and all of that. And so when we put these initiatives as a response, it was also a very informed decision around what are the key things that we think will move the needle. And we continue to refresh that. We continue to broaden our listening, and we every year we kind of use that as a way to build up and get better from year on year rather. Yeah.
Now, Mika, just to stay with you, how does the work, and you actually answered one of my questions that was going to come up around executive support, and you'd mentioned the importance for those of you on the call, Mika mentioning Shamil Jussuf, the group CEO of Vodacom, of the Vodacom Group, and the importance for those leaders on the call, the importance of executive support, seeing executives living and the boards as well, in the hiring that they make. One of the stats that I didn't put it on the slide, but came from that global gender gap report, was the number of women being hired into C-suite positions is actually declining since 2022. So new hires into CEO positions or CMO or the C-suite is actually declining globally. And we could speculate on what the reasons are, but it is a worrying trend. And obviously, what the rest of the organization sees in those hires. But Mika, in terms of you mentioned the code like a girl initiative, some of your other initiatives as well, a lot of your ICT support around GBV, gender empowerment. How does the foundation's work and the CSI work support gender equity, both in the organization and obviously those outward facing initiatives that you do have?
100%. So Sheldon, firstly, our foundation, actually, that's where our purpose lives. So when I called out planet and people earlier, a lot of the work that you see the foundation does is driven from that people pillar. And we specifically call out supporting previously disadvantaged groups. And in that previously disadvantaged groups or communities, we find, the GBVPs, we find women and so forth. So when we go out and do a particular work around GBV, you will find Sito, our CEO for Vodacom South Africa, also speaks very well around that. We've created a platform as well that support people that are experiencing GBV. They can actually log it on our platform, and we're able to put in resources and whatever kind of support that they need. So for us as an organization, we understand that we exist in a society, and society has its own issues, and we want to be part of the solution. So the work that foundation does is really to unlock those opportunities. When I mention Code Like a Girl, for instance, we have an investment that comes from my team as Talented Culture from a People Space. We have investment that comes from foundation. We have a network of schools that the foundation today supports in terms of digital infrastructure. So from computers, access to these zero-rated networks. That's all the stuff that foundation will set up as an infrastructure, so that when we want to say we want to be able to go to a particular school and identify a group of young females, the foundation will partner with us from, there is a school, there is an infrastructure that we've put in place, and that's resources, that's money, that we put in there, not just lip service. Then my team is able to then build these programs that actually then finds the women, or the young girls, equip them from that perspective. And so I would say very much financial resources, so the foundation does that. In terms of the actual social responsibility, going out in these communities, creating and looking for where can we make an impact. You'll see we go big also in just some obvious things, basic things around volunteering. We encourage our people in the organizations to be part of all these efforts that the foundation drives. So very much linked and living in action, if I can call it that. We work very closely with Bongo, Sestaki, and the rest of the foundation team, even when we just do things internally in the organization. So everything that is tied to our people agenda, it just by default, it means that we are working together. And I think for me, that's a very powerful infrastructure. And hence I also started the conversation with, it's such a great privilege to be part of that organization, because in some instances, you'll find that it's an HR agenda, and it ends there. And then there's not much of budget. The infrastructure is not set up to enable this agenda, So one of the things that in particular I called out, which was about a year or two ago, was the fact that if we are to drive inclusion at an organizational level, it cannot be an HR agenda. It cannot just be sitting here at the center with Mika. And so when I say the purpose actually calls out people as one of the pillars, that's because we actually at a high level, we're able to say, if the work is going to be real, if the work is going to be impactful, it needs to be led at an organizational level. So we use the foundation as one of the channels that we can tap in to be able to drive and make the change that we want to see in the society in which we live.
Mika, thank you very much. And I think that's really important in terms of how it ties in both in terms of the organization and the philosophy and the strategy, as well as then, your outward work. And I think, at Trialogue, we talk about strategic CSI, where, the CSI work is embedded within what the organization is doing, its skill sets, its resources, and the like. You mentioned volunteering. We focused on that last month. So it's not just the financial involvement, both internally and externally, but the skills development aspect that goes along there. Shamila, just from your perspective, if for our audience who are from the NPO sector and the development work, your lens on that, what would your suggestion be in terms of ways that NPOs who might be focused on a specific area, but the gender equity cuts across all of society, right? So whether your focus may be on women in farming, for instance, or your focus may be on social development work and community work as well, but we know the structural obstacles that women face cut across the board. How do you suggest NPOs work or try to influence in the work that they do, when it comes to, having a broader view on gender equity?
Sheldon, you've asked me the difficult question. Could you ask that of the ladies? So I think the NPO role is such a critical one because it works in spaces that traditionally your corporates and government really don't get into or affect at that level. I think the first thing is for NPOs to understand the power that they have in being able to engage usually directly with communities. And hopefully that is what they do because they're then surfacing issues that don't necessarily get easily surfaced and are having that opportunity and the time to engage with communities directly. So the first one is to be able to really get a good handle on that. And that societal dialogue is such a critical one. So acknowledging that space, and I'm going to call it the luxury, and maybe that's the wrong word, but the privilege that you have of being able to work in those spaces. And then taking the responsibility of elevating that into the platforms where they can then drive those changes. And so being smart about how we're able to do that. Is this outcome or is this sort of challenge that I'm seeing and potentially the opportunity to fix it something that would be relevant to a corporate that is working in that space? Is this something that I need to get into the right channel in government? And really finding those channels for influence, I think for me, are the things that we need to look at as an NGO community. And acknowledging the NBI is slightly different because we're business based, but really the modes are similar. It's about understanding that, finding those spaces where those conversations can happen and tackling it differently. When we look at policies, when we look at legislation, they're often sort of framed in ways that look at numbers, okay, how many women, what percentage, whatever the case might be. And those are really important measures because those are ones that just tell us where we are, but it doesn't necessarily tackle the underlying detailed issues that will keep them there, that will keep them. And you shared, those numbers about decreasing number of women in suicide. I honestly was not aware of that immediately, but that is terrifying. And in hindsight, I'm not surprised when I heard the numbers. But those are the things where NPOs need to find what is the sweet spot that I'm working with, and then who needs to know the information that I'm able to surface from this and find the right channels to be able to do that. That translation is critical in my mind so that you can then tackle the underlying issue and be able to then demonstrate the impact. Most of us, are relying on funding of different forms, and almost without fail, a funder wants to understand impact. And so your ability to clearly articulate which gap you're looking at, why it matters, and where those filters are to be able to then channel that out for greater impact, I think are really critical ways to do that. One quick example you mentioned, working with women in farming or in agriculture, for example. The typical being, okay, farmers need to know this because, they've got to get women involved. But if you take that a step further and look at, for example, who is funding those farmers, it's a number of banks, right? We've got agricultural funding that needs to happen. It could even be foundations in some instances or whatever. But those entities, if you're making the case strongly enough for why this matters and where you can impact that and how it then translates into things that they should be measuring, you can influence a system change, but at the same time be able to impact on the ground. So it's really looking for behind that ways further that you can go and then making that story as clear as possible so that we impact those outcomes. The other thing very quickly is I think hinging it off the frameworks. And again, my bias is corporate, so please forgive me for that because that's a space we work in a lot. It's going to be, if you know that corporates are quite often driven by how they measure on sustainability, whether it's ESG frameworks, whatever that might be, you need to understand which are the areas they look at. And so if you're able to make the case more easily for them, you're able to meet your objective, but also theirs, but you're holding the ground on that impact for that particular society and the lived outcome and experience that you want that shift to bring for this community. And you're doing that in a way that can take others along with you.
Shamila, just to stay with you quickly, and then I'm going to come to you, Mika, just pulling some questions from the Q&A box. And thank you, Puleng, Saida, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Kayang, and Papama. Thank you for your questions there. Shamila and Mika, Puleng's got a question here saying, what does gender equity mean percentage-wise. We heard at the beginning that the current percentage of women in management is less than 7%. Hence, my pessimistic view. This is Puleng's pessimistic view about the 2030 goal. And Puleng, you wouldn't be alone in that pessimistic view. What is the target? So, Shamila, what would an industry target, or not an industry, a societal business target look like from your perspective? Oh, you're on mute? You're
Apologies. I was going to say I'm going to have to quickly go look at the SDG on gender equality to look at the SDG framing of the target. But I think generally we sort of look at what is representative of a demographic. And so, ideally in an equal society, we should have that reflected, in whichever level we're looking at. So whether that's saying, we're 51% women, 49% men, is that where you need to go to? I think I want to say that we're saying that's a very broad framing, just looking at the demographic level, but within different sectors, there are differences as well. There are certainly some sectors, for example, if you're talking to sectoral targets, that just naturally are more suited for males to work in and will then see a higher percentage. But we've got to be careful about that framing as well, because there could be natural barriers that women don't get into that space where they could be and they could excel. And so making a concerted effort to give them the opportunity to be there is really what we want to look at. So it's not an easy answer because there's so many nuances within sectors. But I think if we had to go for broad brushstrokes, yes, broadly it would be the demographic split.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, on your
Of course,
point there,
equity is a bigger question, right?
yes,
Within what's the felt experience, I think is the quick answer for that one, because you
yeah.
can be there but feel excluded.
Yeah. And I mean, if we just look at, you mentioned the SDG goal and it's, SDG 5. If you look at the target 5.5, ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision making in political, economic, and public life. And I mean, just on the, just the homepage itself, there's no specific target. So it's proportion of seats held by women in a national parliament. And I think, we're held up quite highly in South Africa in terms of the steps we've taken in our parliaments and our local provincial legislatures, and obviously our municipal councils as well, and then the proportion of women in managerial positions. So Puleng, while there's no number to it on the actual SDG, at least on a cursory glance, I think we can all agree that 7% is grossly skewed against women on that front. Mika, from an organizational point of view, does Vodacom have any targets that it works towards?
Yeah, certainly.
On a role fulfillment level?
100%. So firstly, we are also guided by the EE, so important to also understand that we work within the parameters of the laws in the country. I think the work that we've been trying to do over the years is to say, and which some organizations have also chosen, we're just going to stick to what is mandated, to us. But we truly do want to be a transformational organization. So firstly, the target I mentioned around 50-50 by 2030 at executive level, at Vodafone level is real target. That if you listen to Margarita, who leads up our Vodafone organization, she will speak about it confidently. And if you look at any of our reports and etc. that's been published, it speaks about that target as being a 50-50. Today, in Vodacom South Africa, we've actually overachieved that in that of 66% of our executives are females in the Vodacom South Africa steerco. So those are numbers, those are facts. And in the organization across different levels, we also say 49% of our makeup is actually Black females. So really, really important to understand those numbers are real. So we have numbers. Our ultimate, we call it a North Star, is the 50-50 reach target at executive level. And then and I think, again, it's important to understand, for us, it's beyond the number. It is us saying we want to be an organization that truly is representative of the society that we want and the world that we want for the upcoming generations. So those are the numbers. And I think it will be, whether the number is reachable or not, obviously depend on many things: economic shifts, the organizational growth, a whole lot of that. But important to set an ambition. And I think if we start with the positivity, which says we are an organization that really champions growth, that champions inclusive society, etc., and that's who we want to be. We can fail, or we can push out that target by a year or two, depending on what happens. But the intention is so important to us. And when we go out and articulate ourselves, we articulate it with the hope that people will understand and receive that that is the goodwill, that's the intention, and that's the type of organization that we say we want to be. We've got active steps that we are doing, as I called out, at an early career stage. We've got Code Like a Girl. We've got bursary schemes that we fund for young people upcoming in their careers. We've got platforms like You Grow, where we support women in their early careers in terms of how they can really optimize their potential. Then we've got the work we do with the employee resource groups. These are all things that we can do. And it is important to also say to everybody, and I think it's a point you also made, Sheldon, earlier, this is everybody's business. It is not the business of Vodacom or corporates only. It should be the business of everybody, meaning that even in our own homes, we champion gender equality. We bring up young girls believing and thinking and truly, truly believing that they can be anything they want to be. So for me, that's kind of the perspective. So one, the goal may seem too far to reach, but it is important to have a vision, and we stick by that. And I think everybody needs to be in that kind of frame. Yeah.
No, I think that's really important, and as we heard, it's good to have a target that one works towards. But as Sharmila also mentioned, what is how are we improving the lived experience? And I think that's where Mika is so central to, obviously, the organizational culture there. Papama, your question on early childhood development. What is the panel's take regarding the domination? And I think domination may not be the right word, but obviously, more females in the early childhood development sector. Let me just bring in Vatiswa on your from your experience and obviously the policy work that's being done. I mean, Stats SA notes it. The Global Gender Gap Report notes it, that women are often, I think, naturally, some may take up more caregiving roles, which ECD we see a lot of. It's a lot of people from the ground who work in ECD from a duty of care, and I think that's really important. But at the same time, I think that the proviso being made saying, we shouldn't just be pushing women or limiting women to those type of roles and saying this is all you can be. I think that's an important topic. How would you view it? And I think Sharmila also touched on it a bit, where there may be certain barriers to entry, how would you view it in terms of ensuring, that women aren't typecast or aren't blocked from doing anything else, but, do play a critical role in a sector like ECD?
Well, it's two things. It's firstly talking about the role that women play in what we call the care economy, that is also underestimated and almost seen as it's that thing that women do, which is not necessarily quantifiable. So as SAWID, we are also saying it needs to be quantified, because it has a significant contribution as well to the health and wealth of the country. There may not be numbers to back it up, but where women are playing those roles are equally critical in the development of our communities and society. So it's one of the areas that we are deliberate as SAWID in venturing into, to just spotlight the need to quantify and see it also as a care economy intervention or program that that also just needs to be spotlighted and not just yet, and it's just a sidebar thing. It's a skill. And it is a skill because that is what women first and foremost are good for, right? It's an innate a skill for women to be nurturers. And as they are nurturers, they are contributing to communities and society in a specific way, whose intended output is ultimately contribution in the workplace, just from the roles that they play as being caregivers in their communities from which they belong. So I think for us, that is at the heart of what, even if you're talking early childhood development and the role that women play in that space, we are now saying we are literally surfacing the importance of the care economy as something that needs to be quantified and also given as much prominence as other roles that women play. And that's why we are embarking on the social workers program as SAWID, because we are saying in our communities that are encountering so many social ills that affect a community development, that are contributing towards crime, that are contributing towards poverty. You have social workers that are at the heart of contributing to this care economy, because that is a role of a social worker. How do you then surface these social workers so that they can contribute and bring their skills towards hopefully curbing some of the social ills that we have in our economy? Because by curbing those, then we are also contributing not only to the employment numbers in the country, but we are also contributing towards alleviating the same issues that are also at the heart of causing the unemployment and the crime and all the various ills that we have in our communities.
No, that, and I think I love your framing of it. Is it's the care economy, right? It's a service, it's important, and I think we need to recognize people's work and payment for it. And it's been mentioned in a number of reports. We've got 6 minutes to go. I told you guys 90 minutes is going to fly by. Kudzai, I see your question, and I think it's a great way for us to bring the conversation home. Saida, yours as well, because I think it really does tap into what can we do? What are practical steps that our delegates can leave with from this conversation to implement in their organization. So Saida saying, what would your actions in implementing these strategies and making an immediate impact? And Kudzai saying, what are the most effective ways of ensuring we revive and accelerate equity? Can you share what has made the biggest impact? So I'll start with each of you. And Mika, from Vodacom's perspective, what have you learned that works, and what would be your one tip for the organizations on the call to go and implement, either in their organizations, in their bodies, in their networks, to revive, as Kudzai says, and accelerate equity and have an immediate impact?
Awesome. Sheldon, I think for us as an organization, and when I reflect on my own journey as well, there is no such a thing as small effort, and I think sometimes we wait for the big, grand, rescue mission type of situation. And it's an everyday accumulation of what we choose, the decisions we make every day. And so for me, I would say, I always think everybody has got a contribution to make, and it could be, just your resources in terms of in your own capacity. As, do you know a young girl that you can mentor? Do you know a young girl that's knocking on somebody's door? If you know Mika can help in a particular field, hey Mika, I've got a young girl, they need support in this area. And I think those, sometimes we underestimate what we can do within our own capacity. And so I would say, firstly, the CSI begins at home, means home is the individual as well. And so you yourself, instead of looking up, look within yourself as to what is it that I can do as Mika. I've got two young girls at home. And in that space, I also cultivate an environment where they know and believe that they can do anything and everything, not because we've got all the resources, but because actually they have an equal right in this society that we live in. And I also channel every decision towards that. My husband does the same. Our entire system is set up to be advocates, if I can put it that way. We are actually, I don't know if I should say fortunate or unfortunate, but as a family, we have a lot more females at home than boys, So even in how the genders interact, we are careful of how we speak, what we say, and all those kind of things. So for me, I really do think that charity begins at home. So practically in your own environment, what it is that you can do. I come from a village, very small. And so I also try to make sure that the environment where I come from, beyond my own family, they know that there is a Mika. Even if it's to say, oh, we have these bursaries available. Oh, by the way, I know Vatiswa who can do this and that. So that's what I would say. Because when you start small and you later in life are trusted with a platform such as this, you know where the problems are, you know where the real pains are. And so you are able to channel those big investments and those big efforts towards the right thing. So that's what I would say. And lastly, maybe in closing on my end, if you are in an organization, that is able to make an impact, make sure that leaders are leading from the front. That's definitely my key takeaway.
That's yeah, CSI beginning at home, and I think you've really brought it back in a beautiful way and a meaningful way. Kudzai, Saida, I hope that that helps you. Shamila Vatiswa, I'm going to come to you now for your 1 minute tip. I know it may be hard to encapsulate in that, but Shamila, for the organizations, and I suppose echoing what Kudzai and Saida have said, what would be your one tip that, one or two that people can take away and start doing and rolling out in their organizations, both corporate and NPOs?
Thank you. Sheldon, so of course, I mean, Mika said it so beautifully on the beginning and home part. So let me quickly go to the other ones on companies then. Starting on the inside, I think measure and confront your own inequities honestly, whether it's pay gaps, leadership representation, or workplace culture. So without that internal transformation, your external efforts are going to lack credibility. So start there. And that's for both big corporates and NGOs. I mean, NGOs are not guilty of some of these things. And so we need to look at ourselves too. Secondly, aligning volunteering and development initiatives with your equity goals. So skills-based volunteering can be an extraordinary tool when it builds the capacity of women and underrepresented groups. So not only within the company, but also within the communities that businesses serve. And so if you look at the sort of measure, act, and align framing, and we can do these things with courage and commitment, we really can transform those workplaces and then the ripple effect of families and communities. Sheldon, I need a second to talk about voice.
Yes.
We know that the simple messaging for girls right now actually is quite clear. You can do anything you want, go out and achieve it. I have two boys, young boys, and I can see where there's a huge opportunity to be able to also shape their minds, to move away from some of the norms you've seen intergenerationally, to be able to help them understand their space in this society that we want to create as well. And that's quite a conversation to be had, because in many instances, they're still parented by fathers who come from an older mindset, and so they are all going through this transition. And I think that is important as well, is to be able to understand is how do we take them along with this. And that's a huge responsibility across the board. So I'm going to leave it at that with the starting at home.
Okay, awesome. And just before I come to Vatiswa, just a reminder, I've popped the survey into the chat. Please do give us your thoughts after the webinar is done. It'll be a quick one, 5 minutes. It really does help us shape the conversation, the type of topics we cover and how valuable you found the discussions as well. So thank you. I've also popped in Lerato's email address for those of you interested in advertising in the handbook or featuring a case study on that front. Vatiswa, what would your tip be to companies and NPOs, in terms of their gender equity work?
I think for me, Sheldon, the main important thing is the fact that non-superficial collaboration is the only way that is going to help ensure effective gender equality pursuit. And what I mean by that is, at a lot of times, companies are chasing their bottom line. Some of the initiatives that they could be pursuing from a CSI point of view, at any point, the organization will say, cut costs, we are not meeting our numbers, because that's their reality. How then do we leverage off the NPOs who are in that space to help surface and bring the information, the programs, and all of that, so that at the end of the day, it is more the NPOs showing up with where they are strong, and then the organizations can, whilst they are focusing on meeting the bottom line, then through the partnerships with the NPOs, their agenda is still being driven. So I think for me, that effective non-superficial collaboration and partnership between NPOs and corporate is what will make sure that this work is going forward in a more sustainable way.
Vatiswa, I love that. Thank you very much. Thank you to my panelists, Mika Nkuna Valoy, Managing Executive for Talent and Culture at Vodacom South Africa, Shamila Subramani, the CEO of the National Business Initiative, and Vatiswa Moya, the Executive Director of the South African Women in Dialogue. Thank you very much for your time, your expertise, sharing. I know our, looking at the chats, I can see the value that's been provided today. And thank you to you, our attendees, for joining us today, for your questions, for your chats. A reminder that the recording will be uploaded, and a full write-up of the webinar will be uploaded as well and sent out to all those who registered, as well as uploaded to all of our platforms. Thank you very much. Where has the time gone? Bookmark next month, the final Thursday of every month, September. Look out for comms on what our topic will be next month. And I wish you all a good day.
Thank you very much,
you.
Sheldon. Thank you to
Bye.
all the participants.
Bye.
I appreciate it.
Yes,
Ciao,
lovely. Thank you. Bye.
ciao. Bye.